Hi everyone, it's Marissa here from Rise High, Lockie here from Turner Real Estate, and we're here to bring you the March quarterly property update for the Adelaide property market. How's it going, Lockie?
Very well, busy, thank you, but all good.
It's hard to believe that Easter's already over and we're now well and truly into April, which is amazing. This year's flying already. What's going on with property?
Well, sales volumes are still very, very low, and same with the rental market. So it definitely is still a seller's market, and it is still, sadly, for all those people looking for rentals, a landlord market, but obviously excellent for investors, and excellent for landlords, excellent for people that own houses as well. But yeah, still certainly sort of on the better side of things for both property owners in terms of trying to attract a tenant and also getting their property sold.
What has happened to the Adelaide market in terms of values over the last quarter, and what are we sort of seeing as the trends now that things are starting to settle down?
Yeah, well, being Adelaideans, we're always very Adelaide centric with our figures, and I think it's really important to do that because we're the only ones that are. Basically, the media always talks about the national figures and what's going on there, and particularly, you know, the big cities on the eastern seaboard, Brisbane, but particularly Sydney and Melbourne. But Adelaide has basically the same. It's like, I think for March in particular, it was even, so it didn't even go down or up, but if it has been going down, it's only been going down 0.1. I think the biggest fall for one of the months, January was 0.2. So the values that we had from COVID, which went up about 30%, are still in the market.
Yep, so Adelaide has, and this is what's really traditionally happened with Adelaide, so we're slow and steady, then we have our period of rise, and then we just establish a new norm. Do you think we've sort of hit that norm now, like that new baseline?
Marissa, I do, and I think that's an incredible thing about the Adelaide market, is you don't get the highs and the lows, and you do get growth, and it happens about every decade, and then it just sort of tends to even out for a little while, and I think we're probably in one of those markets now where it's just going to even out a little bit. It's a really interesting time. You know, the IMF is stating that, you know, the global economy is probably going to soften a little bit, but the Adelaide market and the fundamentals are still really, really strong in terms of keeping prices up, with immigration, with the net inflow increasing, but just a chronic undersupply of houses for sale and rent. And, you know, there's no shortage of renters and there's no shortage of buyers. So I think when the properties do come up for sale, you know, that will keep prices up in the Adelaide market. So I can't see them going down a lot. I can't see a big drop at all. It's probably more of a potential with interest rates starting to potentially even out, that they might even sort of start to creep up a little bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting because obviously we all know that property values are driven by the basic economics, supply and demand. So right now we've got a situation, like you said, with low supply, still pretty strong demand, which is obviously keeping prices quite strong. And you talked about, you know, migration. Do you think that's really had an impact yet, or do you think there's more to come with that?
Well, certainly in the Adelaide CBD, the migration's been good because since the end of the pandemic, the international students have actually come back to the Adelaide market. So apartments in the CBD have actually increased, and they were really low, obviously, for many years.
COVID,
so that has seen a resurgence. I think we had a lot more interstate movement as well during the COVID period. A lot of families who were originally from Adelaide had some sort of association tend to come back from Melbourne and Sydney markets as well. I think that's probably evened out a bit now as, you know, the whole world's opened back up again. But that was certainly a factor. But mainly in the Adelaide CBD.
And what do you think is causing supply to be so low? Like, why aren't people listing houses, and why is supply so low compared to, you know, this time previous years pre-COVID?
Yeah, well, I think there's a few things going on here. One of the things that people would often think about when they sell is that, well, that's cool, I'll sell, and then I'm going to go and hunt for something else. But they can't find much in the market, so the low undersupply affects it really, because it sort of all goes in a circle.
Creating
so
a
the people that
spiral
are going to sell think, well, I won't sell because I won't get anything. And then one of the defaults that people used to have, we still do have, of course, but they think, well, I'll sell first and they'll rent. But now they're worried about actually being able to get a rental, because like we're getting sometimes up to a dozen applications on certain properties, and it's harder to get one of those now. So I think there's a lot of worry about people sort of, if they do sell, actually how easy it's going to be to get into the next property to either rent or buy.
And what sort of activity are you seeing from buyers? Like, you know, is the demand still strong? I mean, I know there's been a few interesting auctions recently. Like, what are you sort of seeing from the buyer space?
The buyers are still super active. We just had an auction in Glenside 2 weeks ago, and it was about 483 square metres of land. It was in the Glenunga International High School zone. So, and that's really a big thing, is where a property is located. Glenside's, sort of in the east, in that sort of school zone. That also does increase interest. But we had 20 registered bidders for an auction. So that's 20 buyers who can buy unconditionally. And we went well over 100,000 over the reserve price, which is absolutely phenomenal. So we sort of see those sort of things in boom markets. So, and that only happened about a week or two ago.
So we're still seeing then situations where prices are still exceeding our expectations.
Yeah, just not as much as what they were. There's no doubt that buyers are a little bit more measured now. They're a little bit more indecisive. But I'm sure we'll get interest rates soon. But that's one of those factors where I think with the rate pause for April that maybe we've reached the top of that market as well, and that might increase or improve the market sentiment for buyers, and that little bit of indecisiveness there will possibly be a little bit less of that, which is why I think the market might improve slightly, because I think once people see the end of interest rates, they can see the light at the end of the tunnel with uncertainty about where money will be, and then that will bring that more active behaviour back into the market.
I completely agree. I think that pause of interest rates in the last Reserve Bank meeting was a real sigh of relief for most people, because I think it was just that uncertainty of when will it ever stop and how high will it get. And of course, we still don't know what the end point will be, but I guess the pause has given us some hope that we are getting closer to that end point, closer to that highest point in the market. And I think, like you said, the interest rate rises that we've had over the last 10, 11 months have caused a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, and that does stop people from making big decisions. So once we do get to a new level of normal as to what those interest rates will be and where they're going to land, I feel like there'll be a bit more certainty in the market. People will be more confident to make decisions.
Yeah.
And that in itself could impact supply and demand.
And that could be the change, hopefully. And, and then we'll sort of see a bit of this becoming unstuck or unblocked, and then we'll sort of get a bit more of a fluid market. Yeah.
But I actually feel like that's going to drive more demand as well. So I don't see that will be a cause of property values dropping. If anything, like you said earlier,
there's just more activity in
I
general.
think there'll be more activity, and hopefully it might even put a little bit of an upward swing as well. So good for sellers too.
Yeah, that's right, Marissa.
So let's talk about rentals for a moment. We did mention them before. You said, demand from tenants is really hot, and obviously lots of people are going for rentals. What is causing this crazy rental shortage?
Yeah, well, I think the issue is just the amount of houses that are for sale, and I think the low end of the market, where there was a lot of affordability for that $300 a week, is now $350 to $400 a week, and the people that were paying $500 to $550 are maybe starting to rent those properties, like the really low cost properties, and that's squeezing out those people that can only afford those properties at the lower end, which is why we're having a bit of a housing issue, and why there's a bit more homelessness and those sorts of things going on, is because that rental affordability is gone. Sort of another factor in it all as well is the fact that we've also sold as an agency. I'm sure it's happened right across the board. A lot of our investment properties have been sold to, which is a good thing by the way, to first home buyers, and some of them to investors. So that's actually pulled those properties out of that rental pool, which has exacerbated the issue a little bit.
So once again, high demand, low supply, and that's sort of where we end up. So where do you see this going over the next 6 to 12 months in terms of this rental demand? Do you think this is sort of a trend that we expect to continue, or do you think at some point it's got to get to some sort of equilibrium? Like, where are you thinking it's going to go?
I think in terms of rental prices, is that the prices increases we had will remain in there, but I don't think they're going to continue to grow. If anything, there could be a slight lowering in rents per week. And that's mainly because the market has opened up has opened up again. We've had an interest rate rise, and I think it's going to even out a little bit from here. I still think the supply is a chronic ongoing issue, and the governments around the world, and especially in Australia, are scrambling to try and build more housing, because up until this point, the federal government, state governments have essentially had to rely on investors, like mum and dad investors, to deal with this housing issue, and now that's not enough. There's not enough supply in the market for it. So until new land is released and new properties are built, and like in their tens of thousands annually, it is going to continue to be an issue for at least the next 3 to 4 to 5 years.
Yep. And so just to wrap this up, Lachie, I'd love to get your thoughts on some top tips for buyers in this market. So we're actually still seeing a really strong demand from buyers and people wanting pre-approvals in the current market.
Yeah.
It sort of dropped off a little bit post-COVID, but now we've seen that pick back up. So I'd love you to share a few tips that you have from, you know, the real estate agent's perspective of what can a buyer do to put themselves in the best position to you know, move forward on the house of their dreams or the house they want to purchase. What advice do you have for buyers in the current market?
Yeah. Number one is to have a mindset of looking at a lot of different properties in a lot of different locations. If you're going to Channel where you're looking in a particular suburb or area and thinking I'm only going to buy if something comes up in that area, it will probably make it very hard. Mm-hmm. I think you need to look at either units, townhouses, houses, but also I think a good thing to think about is to buy a property in perhaps another area that you've never even driven to or been to. It could be down at Aldinga Beach, or it could be out north somewhere, but just get into the market, buy a property, you can rent it, you can be the owner, but you can rent that property, and you can continue to rent where you are, or if you're a younger buyer, can, you know, just live with your parents or whatever. So I guess number one is to be really open-minded about just getting into the market in one way or another. It doesn't have to be the property that you're going to live in. Number two is just to make sure seriously, I'm not just saying this because you're standing here, Marissa, but be ready. Have your finances ready. Yeah. And a lot of properties are sold at auction, and you can only buy at auction unconditionally. So be really confident about your finances. Know that you're going to get your approval done. Make sure your approval is up to date of the amount you can borrow. Be really strict with your limit, and that will really open up the amount of properties that you can look at and buy, because you're not just looking at the ones that are for sale. Yes. You're looking at all properties, and often the better ones are auction because the demand is there. So do that as well. That's
such great advice. And the other thing that I'd add to that with the pre-approval is that every time the interest rates change or every time your circumstances change, you really need to be talking to your broker early and just making sure that you can still afford the new repayments and still afford you know, the loan that you've been pre-approved for based on the new circumstances that have presented themselves. So being prepared and ready. And I love your advice of tip number one about being open to just getting into the market. You know, a lot of young buyers, I see they want the dream house as the first one, but really it's more about a stepping stone, isn't it? It's about getting your foot in the door,
equity,
getting into the market, whatever that might look like for you. There's a lot more rent investors out there now that are buying investment properties and still living with mum and dad or renting somewhere else. So be open-minded about that. I love those tips. Thanks so much for joining us today, Lachie. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you again next time for the June property market update. Thanks and have a great day. Bye.
All the best.